Welcome to Bellingham Voices. I'm Marie Marchand. My guest today is Kim Harris. Kim is the founder and CEO of Distinctive Voice Consulting that operates out of Bellingham. She focuses her trainings on cultural awareness and bias awareness. She has a master's in education and a background in social justice advocacy. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you.
It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Indeed. I'm looking forward to our conversation. And the way that I learned about you and your work was through the Whatcom Community College catalog for their continuing education. They have a leadership series that you're teaching in.
Right.
And I was really intrigued by the content and just those brief descriptions. So I said, oh my goodness, we've got to have her on the show, because that's a super important content that may not be floating around Bellingham already as it relates to employers being more inclusive. And so I was thinking, as a starting off point for our conversation, you could describe a little bit about those classes, what they entail, and then also the goal that you have for the participants.
Sure. The goal that I have for the participants is the goal that I have for my business, which is to teach the community and businesses about bias awareness, cultural awareness, and inclusion. And I created these workshops for the community college. They're going to be at Whatcom Community College on March 1st and March 8th. And the goal of the classes is to teach people about their individual and personal biases in workshop 1, and then workshop 2 follows up with structural policies that create bias within organizations and institutions. So it's a two-part series, and each course is 4 hours. So there's 4 hours on the 1st and 4 hours on the 8th, and the first one focuses on individual. You can't really look at structural bias until you can look at bias within yourself, which is why I created the two-part series. So first you look at yourself, and then you look at your organization and come up with strategies to be more inclusive.
What are two strategies that employers could use? So people watching right now and they run a business, give them maybe two things they could implement tomorrow?
Sure.
Is that possible?
It's not really possible for people to just do something, which is the reason for my courses, is to teach those strategies. But some of the things that I will talk about in the class are assessments. Like I will, for example, do an assessment on inclusivity, and it'll be a questionnaire. So things that people can do are to basically do assessment and then come up with strategies to fill in where they're deficient in the organization, which is what my classes do. So those assessments will ask questions such as, does your organization have a diverse leadership board? Does your organization have groups in your organization that have conflict, or do the groups in your organization get around or get along? Do you have different groups in your organization, or is it a monolithic staff that you have? Things to actually identify whether or not their business and organization is prepared for a 21st century business and to serve a diverse community and population.
When you and I first met, we had talked about the year 2050. When people of color in our country are going to become the majority and white people the minority.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine that the workplace, like you're saying, I mean, we have to recognize the diversity and the richness, and be able to, businesses have to serve everyone, I mean, equally and fairly. And we just celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and that's what he fought for back then, a part of it. And it sounds like the more I learn about this type of thing, that we're not there yet, where he wanted us to be.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of work to do, and ways that organizations can try to reach more diverse populations, and is to try to reflect the communities that they serve, and also to try to reflect the people that they serve. So for example, I've done trainings at churches because everyone goes, a lot of folks go to churches, you got everyone coming in the door, and churches have to be prepared to be able to serve and communicate and understand diverse populations. And when I talk about diverse populations, people immediately just think of race. And diversity includes so much more than just race. It's, gender and age and ability and disability and sexual orientation and whether or not you're a parent or whether or not you're a single parent. There's so many aspects of diversity, and coming to my classes we talk about that and unpack that because I think there's a very myopic view of what diversity is, and it's so much greater than people focus on, where they tend to just go to race. And it's not just about race. So when you think about your business organization serving diverse populations, you want to make sure that you're prepared to have policies and procedures that are friendly and inclusive to the diversity of our society. And that can only increase your bottom line when you think of it from a business perspective. The better you serve people and make people feel comfortable, they're going to come back. And you serve people and make them feel more comfortable by understanding what their needs are, and knowing that people from diverse populations have diverse needs, and being able to reach out to those people and serve them in that way.
And within those different diverse social groups, there's more diversity. It's not just women are this way, men are this way, or lesbians this way, or African Americans that way. I mean, there's just so much diversity within these populations.
Right, of course. Groups are not monolithic. And that's one of the things that I do in my workshops and my teachings, is to have those tough conversations that are difficult to have. And I do so in a way that's gracious and affirming and non-shaming, so people are not coming in and to be made feel bad about who they are, as well as not being able to learning how to not treat other people badly for who they are. It's basically just understanding one another and having those conversations that you don't normally have in general public because they're uncomfortable.
And one thing I like about the language you're using is the grace, the graciousness part of it, and the affirming part, that people feel okay to maybe make mistakes in your trainings, I'd imagine.
Sure, make mistakes, ask questions. I have group norms that I go over at the beginning of every class that talk about, respecting where a person's standpoint is, and speaking from your own experience and not judging others, and giving people that space to learn and grow. The only way we can learn and grow is if we make mistakes. And just assuming that everyone's coming from a good place and that we're all learning, including me. We're all learning, and we learn from each other. And that's what's nice about dialogue, having some of the dialogues in the classes. I learn from people that come to my workshops. They learn from me, and I feel like people leave, and I have assessments where people say, hey, this was really helpful. It was really good to have this conversation. There's not very many places where you can have those conversations in a peaceful and respectful way,
When I was preparing for the interview, I was thinking, well, I have a short story, and should I tell her or not? But it's pertinent here. One time I was a student at Seattle Central Community College in a class on civil rights, and it was coordinated entry, so it was 4 hours a day. Coordinated studies, sorry. And it was literature, political science, and history all combined. And so we were together a lot. And it was the first classroom experience I had of being a minority. There were 3 white people. We were women in our early 20s, and then everybody else was African American. And so, I just learned so much about culture, and that's where I learned about driving while black and things like that. And we were able to talk about stuff, and mostly I listened, and the other 2 white women listened a lot. So the students were invited on the last day to dress up as a role model from African American history. And a woman walked in and she said, "Guess who I am?" And one of the white women said, "Aunt Jemima." And she was Harriet Tubman. And so, I mean, all of us were, offended by that kind of stereotype. What happened was the instructor didn't handle it in a gracious way, and she humiliated the young woman, and she must have been way younger than I was. She looked like she was 18. And we had all been in the class together for a quarter, and people had a right to be angry and offended, and the white girl, I was offended too, I just had wished it had been handled in a way that was a learning opportunity for everybody.
Yeah. Those are tough conversations to have, and you really have to look at the heart of the person that made the comment, and not being there, but it sounds like it might have been an innocent comment from the woman who made the statement, and it could have been handled in a gracious manner where there wasn't, I imagine there probably was some sort of shaming and anger, and that is a way to learn, but it's not the best way to learn. And of course, hopefully, in situations like that, you may learn to just not say anything and listen, as you said that you and some of the other students were doing, and that's unfortunate that she had to learn that way. And hopefully you were able to pull something out of that, and we can talk about that when we talk about terms and things like that, because I do want to share with you about some terminology of language and things that apply to that.
Oh, great. And yeah, we can segue into that. Language is so important, and it's so easy to come out of our mouths without even thinking. And then sometimes the damage can be irreparable. Like if we look back into our childhood, we can remember phrases, just words connected to each other that hurt us, that still hurt us today. So I wanted to get your reflections on language, in particular with race and your trainings, and to see what kind of language you want us to have, and as a society, what your vision is, and language in that context of your vision.
Sure. Within the context of race, one of the terms that I wanted to introduce that I do talk about in my workshops are microaggressions. And microaggressions are those short slights, generally by the dominant culture, which is referred to as white culture, by the dominant culture upon people of color. And they're slights in daily conversations that are unbeknownst to probably the white person that can be offensive. And for example, if someone says, a white person may say to an Asian person, "Oh wow, your eyes are not as slanted as other Asians," or a person might say to a Latino person, "Oh, you don't really have a thick accent." And someone might be thinking, "Oh, I'm complimenting this person," but you're really not. It's really not. It's an insult, but it's done in a way that it's thought to be, well, I'm measuring you based on my culture, and I'm trying to compliment you based on my culture, but it's not a compliment. We talk about that in my workshops with videos and trying to increase sensitivities and letting people know, maybe thinking before you speak and what that might feel like, but also just giving examples, because a lot of times if it's unbeknownst, then you need to see how that impacts someone else before you learn, oh, I did something like that, or I said something like that, and I thought I was complimenting this Latino person by saying they don't have an accent, but maybe they were born here and they never had an accent, So, there are things like that when we talk about language and how we speak to each other that just require, a little bit of training and sensitivity and awareness that I like to unpack in my workshops.
It sounds very important for us to all learn together.
Yeah.
It sounds like your workshops are very interactive. So maybe you could give us an example of an exercise that you lead people through, And then what kind of transformations you've seen in people through the exercises?
Sure. One example of an exercise that I just tried, and I held this last, on the 20th of January at the Martin Luther King Human Rights Conference at Whatcom Community College. I taught a workshop called We Are All the Same, We're Human. And one of the exercises that I used there was called Target, Not No Target. And that's an exercise that it's created to create empathy among people of others, and it uses stereotypes. And it's experiential in the sense that everyone in the room gets to be called out for an identity they choose. And then when I call your identity, you walk to the front of the room. So for example, I might say, all vegetarians. And so all the vegetarians will walk in the front of the room and face the people that are not vegetarians, and I will read a list of stereotypes that are not accurate about all vegetarians, but things such as hippie, or someone who is self-centered or just wants extra attention based on what they eat. Read a list of stereotypes that are not true, but in that exercise, it lets people see the expressions in the faces of the people in the target area, and it also lets them see the pain that some of those names make those people feel when those names are being thrown out at them, and those things aren't part of who they are. And so there's a two-part thing. The person that's being targeted gets to feel like what that feels like, and the people that are not being targeted get to see what that does to someone. And then I'll call another group, white men, and then white men will come down, and it'll be like know-it-alls, always have a job, have good credit, stereotypes that may not be true about all white males. And so you get to see what that feels like to be stereotyped against, and then you get to see what it does to others. And the whole point is that the next time any of those stereotypes come up, you'll think about that exercise and say, wow, I remember what it felt like when I was being stereotyped in that target area, and I'm going to make sure I don't do that. And the transformations that I saw from people was just people were hurt, but they weren't hurt because of the exercise. They were hurt because they know that these are things that they've either heard other people say or have said themselves, and it was a moment for them to think about just what that does to people. So, yeah.
Which reminds me of the story at Seattle Central Community College and that girl.
Yeah. You'll never forget that.
Right, and she won't either.
She won't.
Right.
Exactly.
And
yeah. The next time somebody says, "Who am I?" she's probably just gonna wait. I'll wait for you to tell me.
Exactly. And I just want to go back to that for a moment, because I'm not an expert in race relations at all. And so thinking back to that, that's like a small price for her to pay compared to what the other people in the room probably experienced on a daily basis.
Sure. Exactly. Yeah, but the experiential parts are really fun because it gets people up and it gets people in the situation. And so you're not just talking about it in theory or in your mind, but you're actually experiencing some of those things. And they're very high risk exercises, I'll admit, but I feel that I have the ability to maintain and observe people, and I give people in that in the introduction when I talk about group norms, I give people the right to excuse themselves if they're feeling really bad or you're not able to handle things. But so far I've never had anyone to leave or walk out. I've had people just stay there and have the experience and feel like they're better because of it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Sounds like a great service. How long have you been the CEO of your company?
I started Distinctive Voice Consulting in 2014, and just with the goal of helping to raise awareness for people. And it's hard work. It's hard work because it means something to me to be able to go out and talk in front of people and have these conversations, especially in the climate that we have today, as people are getting more polarized. It's nice to be able to have those conversations to better understand one another so that we don't have those divisions.
What are some thoughts you have, other thoughts on the United States today?
Yeah, like I just mentioned, I regret that there seems to be a high level of divide and polarization amongst people that concerns me, because it gets us nowhere to be divided, and it gets us nowhere to work against one another. And America's at its best when people are working and pulling together. I mean, you can look throughout history and you can see when we work together, things are better. And diversity brings in lots of ideas, and it helps things, it helps to improve things. Studies have shown in academic institutions, when you have a classroom of students and students are all from one group, and then you take another classroom and you've got people from different parts of the country, different areas, different backgrounds. Studies show that the people in the diverse class learn more than folks in the monolithic group. Mm-hmm. And that is because people are bringing in different experiences and different voices. And that's the same way in our society. What happens in the classroom can be translated to what happens in society. When we're all different and working together and bringing in various perspectives and ideas, things are better. So it concerns me. So that's why all the more important what I'm doing feels like in my little sphere of influence, I am trying to help eradicate those divides and show people that we're all one, we're all human, we all want the same things, and we don't have to turn against each other or work against each other, but we should work together and have respect for our differences. Mm-hmm.
So it's the important work, I would say, that you're doing for our society right now.
Most definitely.
What kind of environment did you grow up in that lent passion to your worldview and its clarity on what your vision is?
Wow, I think there are 5 things that kind of contributed to who I am today and what I'm doing. And one of them is growing up in Los Angeles, California, a very large metropolitan area that's very diverse. My experiences growing up and living in different parts of Los Angeles, different socioeconomic areas, and just experiencing people from different cultures and economic backgrounds and races, to give me a foundation of just growing and learning to love people and seeing that we're pretty much all the same. We all want the same things. We all want love, respect, dignity, a way to raise our families and have an income. And I learned that growing up in Los Angeles. Another thing is I went to Cal Berkeley, and there's a very large diversity in the Bay Area, and there's just a plethora of information. I was a humanities major, so I studied languages and history and psychology and all those things that gave me another foundation for just learning about people and who they are and what they want. Another area is growing up in a family that had multi-religions. In my own family, I had Christians and Catholics and Muslims. And so I learned about various religions in my own family. So we didn't have one religion and we weren't casting aspersions at another religion, because your uncle might be Muslim, so you're not going to talk bad at Thanksgiving about, a Muslim because your uncle's Muslim. You're not going to talk bad about Catholics because your aunt's a Catholic, and you're not going to talk bad about a different branch or a denomination of Christians because there's somebody in your family that's at that dinner table that's from that religion, and so you just learn. Wow. And being multiracial myself, in my family there were multi-races. I had being half African American and Jewish and European, Spanish and Dutch, and Native American, and having all of that in my family gave me a foundation of, hey, there's everybody in my family, there's all religions in my family, so, and knowing that from different people. And then one other thing is just I worked for the airlines. I worked for Pan American Airlines, and I traveled the world, and I lived in London as my base. And so I traveled the world, and I saw different people and different cultures. And yet again, it's like, hey, everybody's just doing this, trying to do the same thing, raise their families, have some dignity, enjoy life. So that background just gave me the foundation and the voice to be able to talk about what I talk about in my workshops with a sense of experience and authority, and just a love for humanity, for sure.
That's wonderful. What a rich background.
Yeah, very fun, very fun.
I'm wondering who some of your contemporary heroes are that you work alongside. You may not know them, but you're working alongside them, trying to achieve the same society.
Yeah, I definitely have I'm certainly not working directly alongside of them, but I'm certainly carrying the vision and the ideals. A couple of people that come to mind is I really enjoy Joyce Meyer. She's a Christian female pastor that speaks about faith and growth. And she talks about Christianity through the lens of using it to be a better you, which I think everyone should want to do. And so in my workshops, I'm trying to help people be a better sense of themselves by acknowledging, things that are within them that are hurtful to others, that they can learn to not do. I also like Bernie Sanders. I was a delegate for Bernie Sanders. I loved him. I loved his socialist agenda that talked about equality and power and economics, and just working for fairness, and making sure that there's enough for everyone, and making sure that we take care of people in our society, in our community, and sharing the wealth, and not just having the wealth be strangled to the 1%, while everyone else is, clamoring and being divided and clamoring for, the remainder. So those are two people that come to mind.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
How can people get a hold of you, and how can they schedule a training for their employment place or their nonprofit? Do you do nonprofit
I do.
trainings?
Like I said, I did churches and school districts, and sure, they can go on my website, distinctivevoiceconsulting.blogspot.com, or they can email me at distinctivevoiceconsulting@gmail.com. And I'm willing to talk to folks and have a free consultation. One of the things that I do differently is I'm really big on assessment. So I don't come into your organization assuming that I know what you need to know. I definitely interview people. I have some assessments. Sometimes I even send questionnaires out to the staff, with management approval, and ask staff members what they feel they need to know, so that when I customize a workshop for that organization, they're left feeling that they've walked away with something meaningful and that they wanted to know, and then they weren't just lectured about basics or maybe talked to about things that are over their head. So I try to meet people right where they're at, and I use adult theory of learning in my training to make sure that I'm taking people to that next level.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been great talking with you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I like what you're doing, giving a voice to folks in the community, so thank you.
Indeed. And I look forward to taking one of your trainings someday soon.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. And thanks for joining us for Bellingham Voices. We'll see you next time, and take care.